Yeah, there's a lot of stories about motorsports engineers, and one for this, I think this is the Ford rally team in like the mid 2000s, and this is being told by a driver, and I think I forget the details, but basically a new team came in, same car, and basically changed everything. Went a lot softer on spring rates. Softer on shocks as well. And the driver telling the story loved it, and he was a little bit faster. And the other driver on the team hated it and was slower. And there's these like baseline guidelines and stuff like that, and you can run simulations and optimize things in a certain way. And I think you should. I think that's really important. But then the driver needs to be comfortable and confident. And
this is comfort. Comfort and confidence is such a big part as a driver for getting the car to perform. And that's you can never discount that. And I just wanted to hit that home, because you have to, if you're putting on a new suspension, you have to go in kind of with a blank slate, and you have to just drive the car and experience it and decide for yourself. Like, you can get some input, certainly. And if you're working with a good suspension manufacturer, something like RCE, you guys have done a lot of testing, and you can probably talk to a guy, like one of the things that's always telling is, with somebody with an STI is, all right, I need suspension. I need to change the suspension because my car doesn't work. And you start talking about, okay, well, where doesn't it work? Is the turn in the issue? Are you having issues at exit? Is it everywhere? And that lets you kind of hone in on the driving style of the person. And then you can kind of get a sense for like, okay, you need to try this starting setup versus this starting setup, because it's going to, that should get you in the ballpark of more close to what you want the car to do within reason.
Absolutely.
There's no miracles here, but
one other thing, it's kind of minute, but what I've seen is that a lot of mainly STI drivers like, I want to get their car to rotate more in the rear.
Yeah.
And I tell them, you can do that in the stock car. You turn the traction off, and the car really does rotate well once you have all the aids off. It really does perform. That you can feel the rear kick out, and you can really, when you feel it, you can kick out, get back on the gas, and let it settle and ride it out. Traction off, coupled with good suspension, tires, alignment. You're really upset for a track day.
Yeah. Well, and then what's ironic is, to a certain extent, it might actually be better if the car doesn't rotate.
Yeah.
So what's funny is, well, and we haven't even talked about compression here, and I want to touch on it. We've already taken up an hour of you guys' time, so thank you very much. But I got to keep you a little bit longer. We got to talk about compression a little bit. But so with one of the guys we sponsor, Tasso, he's testing out a rally suspension for us on his rally car, and he put it on, and his initial response was, "I don't like it." And the reason he said he didn't like it, or he wasn't happy with it, is because he couldn't get the car to break loose. And he said he had to be really aggressive with his brake or throttle inputs to get the car to break loose to initiate a slide. And in a rally car, sliding is that's how you take a corner. You need to be able to do that. And so he didn't like it initially because of that. And fortunately, we're talking with an engineer at Cusco about this, and he's like, that's actually a good thing. Yeah. That in your scenario, that's actually a good thing, because what that means is that the car is more stable. And you have to really be aggressive with the brake or the throttle input to get it to break loose, but the car is more stable, so you can actually carry a lot more speed into the corner because you actually have more traction. And then you can get up to the limit of traction at a higher speed, and then you can control the car in that slide. And so he made a couple adjustments, went out there and matched his personal best at the first race that he ran with it.
That's awesome.
So it's one of these things where even if you think it's bad initially, you almost kind of have to go for a whole day. Don't touch any of the knobs, just drive the car for a whole day.
Yeah.
Pay attention
to rewire the brain, right?
Pay attention to what you're doing with the car. Drive. If it's not working the way that you expect, try a different approach. Try a different brake or throttle input on corner entry or corner exit to see if all of a sudden now it's behaving differently because it's doing something maybe better that now you can take advantage of that you couldn't before.
That's a super interesting topic to me, which I'm not great at, but the driver engineer conversation is just fascinating to me, and trying to interpret what the driver's feeling, and making changes that make them comfortable, but also make the car faster, and like kind of finding that balance. And we're talking about people sometimes expect a lot of rebound damping and sometimes too much rebound damping because it kind of feels like what they think it should feel like. But in reality, softer is oftentimes faster, but it sometimes does take a little bit of brain rewiring to be comfortable in that, because it sometimes feels it moves around a little bit more than people expect. So
yeah, it's a balance, and this is the black magic. There's so many things at play here, and you can't discount that, because there's no one silver bullet. Like just playing around with the suspension dampening. I mean, it could be an issue with your sway bars. It could be an issue with your bushings. It could be an issue with your alignment settings. It could be an issue with all of them. Yeah. Plus how you're using the car. And so that's where you've got to narrow down the variables and make small changes and get a sense of, like, I think one of the key first points is to get to the point where you can make a change and feel the change and know, okay, I'm going in the right direction or the wrong direction.
Yeah, make one change at a time. Yeah, and take notes.
Yes, and take notes
all the time.
I keep saying I need to get like a logbook of like the setup and just the changes that are made and like the conditions of the car, because like so many times when you go to an event, it's just you're in the churn of it, and you're just like it's not doing this, so let's change the front brake pads, and I'm gonna click some of the rear dampeners, and is it better now? It's better. Okay, just drive it, and then you get to the end of the event, and you're like, I cannot remember what I did. Yeah, I know it's something.
I do the rear or front click shit.
Yeah,
I don't know. You got to go back, and you got to figure it out. Like, yeah,
and like jot down, even if it's not that important, just a good practice, like jot down the temperature, jot down like how you were feeling that day. Like I had way too much caffeine, and like that might have been impacting what I was feeling, and or I was up all night and I felt like crap, and so then the car felt like crap, and maybe it was me. And take all sorts of notes you don't think you need, because they can be important.
Paint that picture so you can get yourself back in that mindset of where you were at in the car and what the car was doing, and hopefully you can kind of suss out where you want to look at, what might have been causing that issue. Just really quick, back to making the click adjustments. Would you say that initially, like you're starting in the middle, if you're going to make an adjustment, would you want to go like say 4 or 5 clicks in one direction, make a bigger change so you can feel like, okay, is this the right direction or the wrong direction? And then just try and narrow in on what the optimal setting would be for you?
I'd say it depends on the shock. If you have one of those shocks that has like 32 clicks, then you should probably make like 4 or 5. If you have a shock that has 20, make 3 clicks at a time.
Because those clicks are going to have more of an effect.
In theory, it also depends on the shock. Like I was talking about that one very popular brand that had that massive range of adjustment. I don't know how many clicks it has, but the range is so big that the clicks do make a big change. But then they also make, for that specific shock, since it's mostly low speed bleed adjustment, the clicks aren't quite even. So on the stiffer end, each click makes a massive difference. And on the softer end, each click doesn't make that big of a difference. And that's true of a lot of shocks. But when there's that super wide range of adjustment, it's going to be much more noticeable. And then, there's some shocks out there that have like 6 clicks or 8 clicks. And that's not a bad thing. Just something to keep in mind. And in that case, you might make 1 or 2 clicks.
Just one.
Yeah.
So maybe as a general rule, 10% of your overall click range. Like start in the middle. If you've got 30, make an initial change of 3. If you've got 20, make an initial change of 2. In whichever direction. Drive the car a decent amount to try and get to the point where you can feel the difference or not. And if you can't feel the difference, maybe go that extra 10% of adjustment in that same direction until you can feel what it is. And if you get towards either end, like proceed with caution.
Right. It might be time for a different shock or a revalve or something. Or a spring rate change too. So
sure. So let's talk about compression valving, just because we haven't even touched on that, and that's a big part of it. And just maybe to say what it is, and that again, like with a higher quality coilover, the advantage in working with a company that has done a lot more R&D is they have spent a lot of time figuring out what this compression dampening should be, or the range that it should be. And that's not something that you necessarily want to tinker with as much, but maybe just talk a little bit about what that is, or the way to think about compression damping.
Yeah, so I guess there's something we've noticed over the years is there's like a couple of different schools of thought on compression damping, especially in like the 2000s, I guess, when like the Subaru suspension aftermarket, at least the US Subaru suspension aftermarket was kind of getting going. A lot of the Japanese shocks were like the only choice, or almost the only choice. And a lot of those were very rebound biased. So they had a lot more rebound than they had compression. And that was just kind of the philosophy from those shocks. It still is to some extent. Things have changed a bit, but and then kind of the Germans, the Germans came and it was a little bit different. They still weren't quite like compression biased, but they had more compression than the Japanese shocks. And then also the Dutch came. And the idea there is kind of, well, with some gas pressure, you get what some people call like platform. And that kind of helps keep the car kind of flat in transitions and entry and exit and stuff, and as opposed to that initial like take a set type of thing, where the car kind of rolls and sets. This can kind of delay that and kind of give a more not gentle, but more slow that down, and give you a car that kind of feels kind of like it's got the word platform comes up. It's kind of has a kind of more set status, I guess.
It feels like the car is like level more initially, because you're using more. Actually, like what I'm realizing now is my bike pump analogy. That's relevant to compression dampening, not rebound dampening.
Yeah, exactly.
And so, like the more aggressive valving you have, like the harder it is to push that bike pump down. And so like the more level the car is going to feel. The downside of that is it also means that the suspension is less able to absorb impacts. And so then the question there, and this is where I think it gets complicated, and why, like when I got my new set of suspension, I got one ways because like I don't want to go down the road of a three-way adjustable coilover yet, because there's a lot of fine adjustment there. And you can get yourself into the weeds really fast, because you have a spring that is absorbing that impact. How much of that absorption do you want to be done by the spring versus the damper? Do you want the damper to just ride along as the spring compresses, which is kind of like what you're talking about with the Japanese dampers, where so the spring is doing all of the energy absorption, or the majority of it, and then you're getting the characteristics by adjusting the rebound of that spring?
Right.
Or do you now want to intervene in how that spring is compressed with the valving?
Yeah. So there's just like there's rules of thumb for everything. There's one for how much compression damping you want. I mean, there's like textbook examples of like how much rebound damping, maybe 70% critically damped, and then compression damping maybe 50 or 60% critically damped. And of course that varies by who's doing it and application, all that stuff. So, there's kind of rules of thumbs and guidelines and stuff like that, but the different kind of tuning philosophies are part of that. The Japanese dampers, coilovers would have stiffer springs too, in addition to the softer compression, to kind of have that support. Whereas the European shocks would maybe have slightly softer springs and more compression damping to get support that way. And and then maybe a little bit more roll, or maybe they're running stiffer sway bars, or and of course examples of this all over the place where that go against that. There's Bilsteins out there for like the BRZ or the Toyota GT86 series in Europe, where they had like 14K springs or something like that. So always exceptions, but yeah, and so this is where if you run a lot of compression damping, it's, in my opinion, much more important to have digressive damping on the compression side. So you can kind of soften those larger impacts.
Right.
Whereas with rebound, you're not dealing with that initial impact; it's the extension after the impact. So you can absolutely get away with a good linear curve on the rebound side. Still nice to have some digression too.
So, and would you say, just kind of to the point that you just made, Drew, that a two-way adjustable, when you have a three-way adjustable coilover, so you have fast compression, slow compression, and then rebound.
Right.
Yep.
The two-way adjustment on the compression side is basically giving you a control over how digressive the valving is, because you're controlling the slow compression and the fast compression separately, which is effectively what a digressive compression valving is doing.
Yeah. So I talked a little bit about how with a single adjustable, you have to be. It helps to know if it's adjusting bleed or low speed or preload, I guess, which would affect like kind of the whole range. But with a three-way where you have separate adjustments for low and high speed compression, your low speed is that bleed, so you can actually like make it really soft, and it'll be a little bit progressive at first, and then your high speed will be kind of everything after that, after the knee. But there will still be a knee, and it will, depending on the shock, if it's it can still digress after that progressive beginning. But it's really important to remember that those two knobs will interact with each other. If you have very, very soft low speed, your range of high speed will be smaller.
Right. Like you need that base first to even get to the top. Right.
Yeah.
So without any base there, anything up high is going to be not useless, but not up to its potential.
Right.
The range is less.
Yeah. And if you crank up the low speed damping, your high speed knob is going to have a big effect on what happens after that. So it's important to like say, okay, 16 clicks of high speed works. Let's see what low speed does now. You're going to have to come back. Once you set that, you got to come back and look at things. So 16 clicks.
Always adjust both of them. Like once you make a big change on one or a change on one, you've got to reevaluate the other.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. So you can kind of control a little bit how the digressiveness of the compression side works, and whether it's kind of like a more gentle progressive start or a sharp edged plateau,
right,
or not. So yeah.
And again here that we're talking about compression, but you've got to factor in the spring too.
Yeah.
And I think where maybe this is an overgeneralization, but I think where people get into trouble is they think, okay, like if you have a coilover that has maybe two-way adjustments, so you have rebound and compression, maybe it's just general compression, maybe it's only, but if it's just one way on compression, is it usually a mix of high speed and low speed, or is it usually one or the other?
It depends. Frequently it's low speed.
Okay.
Only, and the high speed will be kind of set, but it can be done both ways.
Sure, but you're working with the spring too.
Yeah.
And so like, okay, well, I'm going to have a really soft spring rate. I'm just going to have really aggressive valving for the compression, and that's where all my stiffness is going to be in. But that's like, there's some people that do that, but like you can get yourself in trouble there because, and I think the biggest thing to keep in mind is that a spring can respond really fast.
Right.
But the valving cannot respond fast. And the stiffer you go with the valving, especially on compression, the slower the spring can respond. And so like, that's where you can make the front end, say, can get hoppy. Like you're hitting the brakes and just the suspension can't move because there's just too much compression valving. And the tire can't stay in contact with the road. You start to feel a whole, it gets messy quickly.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there's kind of advantages and disadvantages to that mindset. And thinking about compression damping as like a dynamic spring, it's not always bad, but if you take it too far, it is.
Yeah.
So yeah.
And it's go ahead, Larry.
I was saying, depending on what levels of motorsports and stuff, right? Like you say, like a spring, suspension, coilovers, it's all looked at as like a package, right?
Yeah.
Like same when you do like HB, like first stage, your brakes, everything's the safety features like harness, seats, it's all a package, right? You want to do all that together and take in consideration, not do things one at a time.
Yeah.
So like, it's like exactly what you're saying, you want to take in account what spring rate you're using, match that up with the dampening, and you don't want to rely overly on just the damper itself.
Yeah.
So,
right.
And then of course the exception to a lot of rules is stock class autocrossing.
Sure.
You're heavily restricted by like classing and stuff like that. Sometimes doing the things you're not supposed to do will make you faster. In that specific environment. So yeah.
Well, and you know what? Let's talk about autocross for a second, because there's another gotcha out there, which is, I think, called autocross. Thanks for tuning in. To hear the whole conversation, click below for the full episode of this podcast, or tune in every week on iTunes or Spotify. If you like these episodes, be sure to like and subscribe to the channel, because your support is what makes all of this possible. As always, this show is brought to you by Flatirons Tuning, your premier source for any Subaru OEM or aftermarket parts. Check out our website at flatirons tuning.com, and as always, stay tuned with Flatirons Tuning.